Welcome to Python Lesson 15. In the last few lessons, we saw how loops allow us to iterate over a process. And that process can involve something as simple as printing out information or something as advanced as what we're going to see in this lesson, which is to have if statements make decision on information as it's being iterated over. So let's get to it. So a simple for loop will look like this. For I in range, and then some value, let's say 5. And we can print out some information. In this case, we're just going to simply print out I. And let's just run it, just kind of verify. So here we go. So a range of 5 gives us numbers 0 to 4. We also saw that we can, have a variable equal to, let's say, a number. And then within this, we can accumulate information inside of a loop. So the plus equal will add a certain value to s each time within the loop. So what we're going to do here is we're going to add the value of I to s. So let's go ahead and print that summation. So we can see here, the first one's just straightforward, 0 to 4. Those are values of I. But what you're seeing next to it is the summation of the value of I with the previous value. So we can see here 1, 2 gives us 3, 3 gives us 6, 4 gives us 10, and obviously we can keep going on. This is using numbers. There is nothing wrong with us also accumulating string information. And if you recall, the reason we're able to do this is because the plus sign, when used between strings, is something called string concatenation. It's going to add to the string. So let's have a little fun with this, where let's create an old school emoji symbol just using characters. A little guy with a big eyeball, a nose, and a little eyeball. And let's go ahead and print that out. At this point, we're also not going to print out the value of I because we're not interested in the value of I. We're just interested in the for loop executing 5 times. So let's run it. And there we go. So here's our little emoji character. And as you can see here, every time the loop runs, it adds one more of this little character to the string. So I want to show you something else that's kind of cool. In this period of remote learning, social distancing, they're too close. So we got to separate them a little bit. Now you could manually put in a couple of spaces here. That would work as well. Or we can use something called escape characters. Escape characters start with this slash and then followed by a letter. And then depending on the letter, it does something different. So let me run the program for you and let's see if you can figure it out. So slash t, what did it do to each of the characters? I spaced them out. Slash t represents a tab. So let's say we want to space them out a little bit more. So let's do 2 tabs. You can hear now it's spaced out even more. So this is an example, one example of what's called an escape character. The next example I want to run with you involves now using an if statement inside of a for loop. And for this example, we want to do something that involves random numbers. So if you recall, in order to use random numbers, you have to import the library. And we're going to do some accumulation of random numbers in here. So let's say s equals 0, ct equals 0. S will be the sum of the random numbers, where ct will be how many of those random numbers we produced. So again, we'll do our for I in range, and let's do 10, just so we kind of visually inspect. We'll do number equals rand int. Let's do 1 to include 10, so we'll do 11. So we're going to do random numbers from 1 to 11. And then let's simply just print them out, just kind of see what we get. And we're simply going to print out num. There's no need for us to print out I. All right, so you can see here we get a bunch of different random numbers, and if we were to run it again, We should get a different set of random numbers. Actually, I'm noticing we're getting the 11, so I'm going to adjust this. I believe when you put two numbers in there, you actually get the endpoint, which is why it's good to run your programs. So, all right, so there we got the 10. We got a whole bunch of numbers. So what I want to do now is I want to be able to count how many of these numbers were over, let's say, 5. So that's an if statement. So we'll say if number is over 5, let's count it. Let's keep a count of it. So we'll say CT plus equals 1. And at this point, we'll continue to print out the numbers. What I want to do after the loop is to print out, well, how many of these numbers were actually over 5? All right, so one thing we're noticing here, we could tell from our code, this must be the number of how many were there. Let's just verify. So we got 7, 10, 8, and 9. There was 4, but it's kind of hard to read. So what we can do here is we can add another escape character. So /n is the escape character for skipping a line. So we're going to skip a line and then put the number. So let's run it again, and let's see what we get. So we get 5 now. Let's count. So we got the 6, 7, that's 2, 3, 4, 5. So we got 5 numbers. And obviously, if we keep running, we'll get different values for this. I would say generally they're probably going to be about 5. Oh, here's an interesting test case. In this instance, we only had 2 numbers that are over 5. Again, this is all random. So sometimes the randomness will skew very far in one direction or the other. But the norm will be for you to stay within the 5. All right, so the other thing I want to do, this is going to a little bit of data analysis. Let's look at what kind of numbers we're getting, because again, a lot of things satisfy being over 5. 6, 7, 8, 9, and 10. But it doesn't necessarily have to mean that all the numbers were 10, all the numbers were 5. So let's add the numbers up. So in this case, we're going to add the random number to S. And at the very end, let's simply print out the average, which would be S divided by count. So the sum of the random numbers over 5, and then how many they were. Because again, this is not going to be 10. We're getting 10 total numbers, but in order to get the average of just the numbers over 5, we have to produce a separate count. We have to keep track of how many of those numbers were over 5. So let's take a look. Okay, so in this particular case, it looks like our average was 7.2, which if you kind of think about it, that's about halfway between 5 and 10. Let's run it a couple more times. All right, so this is a little closer to 8, 8, 8, 8.4, a little higher. So it almost looks like the 7.2 was maybe like one of the low cases. Here's the 7.5. Ooh, here's a very skewed case. So apparently, now we only had 3 numbers, but it was a high average. Reason being, we had 2 10s in there and the 9. And if you think about it, I mean, this is a simple example of using random numbers, but sometimes as teachers, we look at grades, and an average sometimes just isn't enough. There's some other statistical analysis that we can use to kind of explore how are our students doing by looking at grades. And again, this is just a small example of that. So let's go back to our presentation and review what we've done today. So loops are a powerful construct. They allow us to iterate over a process. And that process can involve anything, honestly, any pre-learned programming concepts such as mathematical operations, input, random numbers, if statements with another for loop in it, that's possible. You could do a loop with another loop in it, that's possible. So again, the possibilities are endless. It's really all about the algorithm that you're trying to solve. So enjoy.